Verse 17, and the seventh angel poured out his vial into the air, just again to repeat, so we have it in mind. And there came a great voice out of the temple of heaven from the throne saying, it is done. So what's important here is that, well, we often hear different things from different leaders, right, about long-term plans and schemes and all kinds of stuff, right? So this whole question of everything will come to an end, it's important not to then think that we all just, it doesn't matter, pack it up, end of history is at hand, what's the point of getting married, what's the point of living, what's the point of having children, right? There's people who say that. I've actually had several people write me and say, Father, what's the point? Why would this world is obviously so insane, and it's obviously coming to an end, so why get married? Why have children? Okay, but this is a mistake. We do need to plan ahead. We don't live without any kind of, forethought. That's not an appropriate way. You don't have anxiety about the future. You don't sit there and live in the future, but it doesn't mean you don't have any sense of planning on a very basic level. You don't just sit around and watch the clock go by, right? Oh, it doesn't matter. Life, this is this. It's a form of basically despair or anxiety and just giving up. That's not blessed, right? St. Paul faced this problem with the Thessalonians. And he wrote to them about the second coming of Christ. They developed imminent expectations of the end. It's all over. Doesn't matter. Nothing matters. They closed their workshops, gathered around the shops that had remained open, roamed from house to house, which led to, what does it lead to? Sin. Ultimately, it leads to sin. Idleness, getting angry easily, and all kinds of things. So it's very important to keep the balance, even though it seems as if, well, we're at the end, right? St. Paul wrote to the Thessalonians, and he's correcting them. He's not saying it doesn't matter. Live as if he says, I'm going to tell you what you need to know with regard to the Antichrist. And we have the wonderful descriptions about the Antichrist from the Apostle Paul. He explains to them what needs to happen before the Antichrist comes. There are, as I said, long-term plans of the leaders of the world, and they're indeed, as it seems pretty obvious today, long-term, generation to generation plans of those who are opposed to the gospel to bring about their utopia. And the elder says, very interestingly, that a perfect example of this is not unique to this group, but it certainly seems to be exemplified, is seen in the accomplishments of international Zionism. From the 6th century BC, their land was enslaved by the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans in the east, the Byzantines, so-called Byzantines, right? The pagan Romans and the Christian Romans, basically. The Arabs, and finally all the Europeans, all in the span of 2,500 years. Everybody knows the history of they were thrown out, they wandered, etc. All through these years, they were planning and scheming to repossess their country, and they did. Now they're governing by an expansionist mentality. It's interesting, he said that 40 years ago, and we're seeing right now a war in Gaza, which is brutal and terrible for so many people. There's a lot of speculation. I'm not going to get into speculation with regard to what is going on there and what's happening, but it's tragic, it's awful, it's terrible. And they have grown step by step by step, and it seems their intent to take back all of ancient, whatever they believe belongs to them. There's different groups of Jews who have that intention. So it's not all at all monolithic. There are those who are against Zionism even, But there are those who are very zealous Zionists. I think this is what he has in mind here: the international Zionists, and not simply those who wanted to return to Palestine and live a life on farmland. Obviously, there's a expansionist mentality. He says, "I spoke about this in the past." He says, and I'll say it again, lest anybody think that he's afraid to talk about this. They will consume it all, he says. I'm not speaking about as a politician here, but they will control and they will overpower the Syrians, Lebanese, and the Egyptians. If they have their way, they will govern the entire world. This is Elder Athanas Vitellineos, not Father Peter he was talking. And I'm simply relaying what he has to say. And it's interesting, he said it 45 years ago, and it appears that they've been fairly successful in growing and undermining the various Arab powers around them in the last 20 years, especially since 9/11. There's been a lot of interesting movement that was rather unprecedented in the Middle East generally. Terrible wars and overturning of powers and all the rest. So he says they're going to overpower the Syrians, the Lebanese, and the Egyptians, all the neighbors. He's looking at this in the context of the Book of Revelation.